And this is something that I noticed the best teachers I knew with challenging classes were very, very clear about this is what I want you to do. And it wasn't just about here's what I don't want you to do. But a lot of people say, no, knowledge, no, we should be teaching skills, which is a great way to keep children stupid. Teach them all of these behaviors really explicitly. And I mean, like completely openly. This is what I would like you to do.
Heute teile ich mit euch ein Gespräch, das mich zutiefst inspiriert hat. Ich habe Tom Bennett interviewt und was er mir erzählt hat, hat meine Sicht aufs Unterrichten in vielen Teilen wirklich fundamental verändert. Für alle, die Tom noch nicht kennen, er ist Gründer von ResearchED, einer globalen Bewegung, die Forschung und Schulalltag zusammenbringt. Statt schöner Theorien geht es ihm um das, was wirklich im Klassenzimmer funktioniert und vor allem darum, wissenschaftliche Erkenntnisse mit Lehrkräften oder angehenden Lehrkräften zu teilen. Etwas, was junge und erfahrene Lehrkräfte meiner Meinung nach auch in Deutschland noch viel mehr brauchen. Wir sprechen im Interview darüber, wie man eine Klasse wirklich leitet und warum die üblichen Tipps, die man so kennt, oft nicht greifen. Wir reden außerdem darüber, was die Forschung übers Lernen weiß, überraschenderweise viel mehr als man denkt, und wie England, sehr spannend, sein Bildungssystem umgekrempelt hat und so dafür sorgt, dass das Bildungsniveau in England enorm gestiegen ist. Tom war selbst jahrelanger Lehrer und weiß genau, wie sich ein chaotisches Klassenzimmer anfühlt. Dieses Interview ist für alle, die sich manchmal fragen, ob sie die Einzigen sind, die mit schwierigem Verhalten zu kämpfen haben. Für alle, die wissen wollen, was wirklich funktioniert, wenn man mit schwierigen Klassen, mit schwierigen Schülerinnen und Schülern oder komplizierten Situationen zu kämpfen hat. Und für alle, die verstehen möchten, wie Lernen tatsächlich funktioniert. Ich wünsche euch ganz viel Spaß beim Gespräch. Mir hat es in ganz vielen Belangen die Augen geöffnet. Noch ein allerletzter mini-kleiner Hinweis. Ich habe das Gespräch auf Englisch geführt. Du kannst aber mit nur einem Klick deutsche Untertitel aktivieren und so alles verstehen, worüber wir sprechen. Und jetzt ganz viel Spaß. Okay, so hi everyone. Today I'm thrilled to welcome Tom Bennett, who's a game changer in evidence-based education. He's the founder of ResearchED. He has created a global movement that bridges the gap between research and classroom practice. And he helps teachers worldwide to teach more effectively. Tom has not only advised the UK government on behavior management, but has also authored multiple books that have transformed how we think about classroom dynamics and teacher training. Tom, I'm very honored to have you with me today.
It's an honor to be here. What a lovely introduction. Thank you. I don't deserve it, but I appreciate it.
Tom, how would you describe the job you're doing at the moment?
Oh God, that's terrifying. I try to do as many things as possible for job security, if nothing else. I write books. I would regard myself as being a kind of a teacher trainer. I think that's probably the best space I'm in. I do a lot of work in behavior consultancy. And I try to advise people on how to manage classrooms, but also schools and systems, because I think that behavior underpins everything we're trying to do in schools. And that's something which I try to take around the world. I visit schools, but also I'm the director, as you mentioned, of ResearchED. So that's kind of half my life. And then the other half is the behavior side of things. So it's a hard and slightly boring thing to try and describe. I've got somewhat of a magazine career.
Interesting. But you've been for, I think, 13 years, you've been in the classroom yourself. So maybe can you describe the journey? How did you get to, being a teacher to where you are today?
Yeah. Oh God. I get people emailing me saying, I want to do your job. How can I do your job? First of all, you can't have it as mine. And secondly, there wasn't really a route which is shareable. I used to run nightclubs in Soho in the West End of London, so that was an obvious transition into teaching, as you can imagine. And then after that, I became a teacher. I became a teacher when I was 30. I loved it. It saved my life. It gave me purpose and meaning, and again a sense of destiny. I remember thinking, this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm not saying I was great at it, but I did my best, and it was purposeful. I love writing. Anyone that loves writing will know that you kind of feel like you have to do it. You feel like, the urge to do it. So I wrote for trade magazines and papers. And a bit like yourself, I tried to share as much as I knew about specifically behavior, but anything really. And from that writing, I started to, I got a job as a behavior advisor at one of the teaching magazines. That became a book. The book became, I started to consult on schools. I started to visit schools and finding out what they did to get great behavior, because I wanted to find out what good people did. And then kind of social media was the next catalyst. This was back in the old days before social media was just full of evil. It was quite nice back in 2008. And when you're on social media, all of a sudden, what you write can be read by anybody around the world. Whereas previously, if you had a good idea, it only got as far as the back of the staff room, if you were lucky, when you're a teacher. And so all of a sudden, I had ministers reading my work and other people. And from that, I got a job. I was asked to be the school's behaviour advisor for the United Kingdom, which was quite a jump, and it was astonishing. And with that, we rewrote the behaviour policy for schools. We rewrote the training policies. We rewrote how we train teachers in the UK, all with a focus on behaviour. So it kind of snowballed, but there's nothing there that I could say to somebody, this is what you should do. It really was very much my path.
Very interesting. Where did you learn all this, or where did you gather all this knowledge of behavior? Because there are many teachers that I know, and also myself, I'm sometimes struggling with behavior issues in the classroom. So where did you find the answers to all the questions that teachers worldwide have?
Well, yeah, indeed. I'll tell you. I mean, most of it was hard won, if I may say so. Most of it was through making every mistake in the book. Like many teachers, I tried to win children over by being really nice to them, or I tried to make them laugh, or I tried to be their friend, or, all the mistakes we make, because the training in behaviour management is really, really bad. I mean, internationally, not just the UK, internationally, it's got better in England. But then I would say that because I helped to rewrite it. But it's still a really big problem. So I worked in lots of challenging schools. And I realised that a lot of what was going on was the fact that I wasn't trained in behaviour management, and also that sometimes schools weren't run particularly well, and that there weren't systems of support in place, and that essentially we were all just guessing. And so I made it my mission. So I read everything there was I could find on behaviour, and most of it was rubbish. I mean, most of it was really, really terrible. Most of it was just guesswork. And then particularly I went to schools that had really challenging cohorts of children, and I watched what the teachers there did when the behaviour was good, and that really transformed things for me. And then my career, I was very fortunate in that I got to see lots of different countries and different systems, and I read all the research I could on behaviour. So this was like a long, slow, this was like a 10-year process for me to try to get some kind of expertise. But if I'm honest, the best way to find out how to manage behaviour is by looking at as many people who are really good at it, observe it in practice, and then try to discern what it is they're actually doing. And sometimes that means asking them. And sometimes it means observing them, because sometimes people don't know what they're doing. And sometimes it means reading psychology and reading cognitive psychology and developmental psychology and research, and seeing how these things kind of go together. So it was a long, 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 slow process. And can I just say, I don't think I'm any better at behaviour than most good teachers. I mean, I'm good at it. I can run a class. I can run a tough class. But the expertise resides in almost every school I've been to. The trick for me is simply going around lots of these environments and stealing people's ideas and then claiming that they are my ideas. That's really what my career is based on. So it's, as I say, there's no qualification in behaviour management. There's no degree you can sit. You could have a PhD in psychology and still be terrible working with challenging children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. I think the problem teachers often have is that their time is very limited, right? So they want to see what other people are doing good and then learn from that, but then they need the resources to actually see the positive behavior. Maybe it's not in the classroom next door, but it's some teacher at a different school or in a different district. But it's very, very inspiring what you're saying. So important. I agree.
Well, if I can just add, thank you. If I can just add to that, it's part of the problem is that when you are a novice at something, and this ties into the work of people like, Professor Paul Kirschner. When you're a novice, when you're new to a topic, it's very hard to realize what an expert is doing, because you yourself don't have the schema. You yourself don't have the foundational knowledge to interpret and understand what it is they're doing. In the same way that, for instance, if I were to go to the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in London and watch, a ballerina or a ballet dancer, I could marvel at their skill, but I wouldn't know how to do it, because it's beyond me. I mean, literally physically, but also in terms of capacity, the skill. You can watch somebody play guitar, but not know how to do it yourself. And I think that a lot of teachers fall into that trap, that we watch expert teachers, But the difficulty is, if we're not sure what we're looking at, we can take away the wrong lessons. And that took me a long, long time to kind of get through that. And as my expertise grew, I hope, I started to understand more and more about what expert teachers were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. I agree. So I would love to get to shed some light and be a bit more concrete. So I receive many, many messages from new, but also from experienced teachers, and they complain about classroom misbehavior. So students not doing as they've been told, students talking back to the teacher, disrespectful behavior, etc. And from what I've already learned from you, listening to your interviews and reading about your stuff, I guess it, to some degree, all comes down to proper classroom management. If I'm correct, you can correct me here if I'm wrong. So,
yes,
what can teachers do to get students to behave, and hence help them to learn in my classroom? So, how can I best handle behavior and organize the classroom? Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I should probably say something like threaten them or something. No, what we do is, I mean, that too, obviously. Okay, a couple of things. First of all, children learn their behaviors from their environment, right? Children learn their habits of behavior from where they grow up. Some children come to school with really, really highly socialized behaviors, habits, and skills about how to behave at school. You know, they just expect to behave. They know that they should, clear their plates and push their chair, and they know they should be polite. They know they should try hard because it's their habit to do so. They've been raised like this. Some children come from very unfortunate circumstances, chaotic or abusive environments, or just disadvantaged environments where they're taught different habits of behavior, where they are expected to behave in a different way. So a lot of the behavior a child expresses at school comes about because of their own habits, and those habits come from their environment. So because of this, we understand very quickly that children need to be taught the behavioral habits that help them to succeed at school. And this is something that I noticed time after time after time, that the best teachers I knew with challenging classes were very, very clear about, this is what I want you to do. And it wasn't just about, here's what I don't want you to do. Traditionally, the emphasis for teachers is, here are the rules, don't break them, which are good, and you must do that too. Like the rules of the road, here is the speed limit, don't go over it. But also, if you want someone to be a good driver, you don't just give them a speed limit and say, don't break it. You teach them how to drive. You teach them how to drive a car so that they're competent, so they feel, oh, this is how I can be successful, because everybody wants to be successful. So one of the first main things I often say is that behavior is a curriculum, because that's how we learn it. We learn behavior, and if it's learned, it can be taught. And if it can be taught, well, we can teach it because we are teachers. So we change our lens, not just from the traditional curriculum, but onto the social curriculum. How do I want my children to enter and leave the room? How do I want them to ask or answer questions? How do I want them to interact with each other? How do I want them to respond when they're wrong, to criticism, to a reprimand? Teach them all of these behaviors really explicitly. And I mean, like, completely openly. This is what I would like you to do, until it becomes a habit. And Peps McCree, who I know you had on recently, he speaks very eloquently about the development of habits. This is what good teachers do. Those expectations are a scaffold, which is a pedagogical device. And the scaffold helps children to understand what I should do next, in the same way that helping a child by giving them worked examples helps them to understand what to do in a maths exam, for example. That's one part of it, teach them what to do. The second part, and this is something that we often get wrong, is that children also need not just taught expectations, but very clear boundaries. Human beings are naturally quite egotistical. I don't mean that in a bad way, but we like to do what we like to do. We tend to do what we like until somebody says stop, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's just how we're up, right? I would have stayed in bed this morning if I didn't have work to do and have to get my children up and so on. That would have been my inclination. And so because of this, children need to have lots of boundaries. They need to know what they're not allowed to do as well. And adults really need to carefully patrol those boundaries, so that when a child crosses a boundary, like they're late, or they're rude, or they throw a pen at somebody, or they fight, or they swear, or they're racist, or whatever, that they need to know that we will push back on that. And we won't just push back in a, please don't do that again way. We'll say, you mustn't do that. Now here is a consequence. And this is the theory behind any deterrent. This is why, for instance, I don't know how you would have it in Germany, but we would have traffic police or traffic wardens. And if you park in a no parking zone, you would get maybe a fine or a penalty or a ticket or something. You know, this is why we have that, to prevent people from parking, you know, outside of Buckingham Palace or wherever. You know, we need these mild deterrents. And the deterrents must be mild, but they must be very predictable. And lots of teachers are very loose with their consequences. Lots of teachers are very, oh, I'll let you off this time, trying to be nice. But that's not being nice. That's actually teaching the children that you are loose and that you'll permit them to do what they like. Kids don't need that. They really, really prefer environments where it's very clear what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. And by a combination of those two things, we achieve true independence, because we teach the children to behave independently of us. So the aim is for them to be independent. The aim isn't to kind of dominate and oppress. The aim is to free them and to liberate them. That's a long answer for a short question. I'm so sorry.
No, it's amazing.
I don't want to undersell it, because those two components are really important: proactive and reactive.
Yeah. No, it's very, very inspiring what you say. What I would like to do a little deep dive on the how students or how I can organize the entering of my students in the classroom.
Okay.
So let's imagine a teacher, she's been teaching this one class for a couple of weeks already, but she recognizes, okay, it's total chaos. It's not working out. The students are not listening properly, etc. And now she thinks, okay, I have to restructure, reorganize my classroom. And she thinks about, good, the first thing that I want to change is how my students enter the classroom. What does she do? Which options does she have in that case?
Well, okay, that's great. And that's a nice real life scenario. So first of all, the most important thing is she's recognized as a problem, you know, because until you do, people can't solve it. It's also important to recognize that that sometimes we set things up badly. Sometimes we establish a relationship with the children which is toxic, which is unhealthy. So the children now expect to come in lazily or late or rudely to this classroom. They now think it's okay because she's allowed it to happen for a few weeks. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of mindset that people have to get into. The big part of the mindset is, I can do this, you know, that we can fix this. A lot of people think, oh no, that's it. This is the behavior. I can't change it now. I'll just keep asking them, and maybe I'll shout at them occasionally, but oh my goodness. It's so that, no, you can reboot at any time with a class. And what you do is this. First of all, you have to say to yourself, okay, what is the problem here? What's the behavior that's not good? And it's normally they're late, they come in at different times, they're not prepared, they're noisy, they don't settle, and so on. Okay, fine. That's what I don't like. What do I want? This is really important. The teacher must ask themselves, what do I want them to do? How do I want them to come in? Do I want them, can they talk or not talk? Do I want them to line up outside of my classroom, or do I want them to come straight in? If I get them lining up, what kind of line do I want? Do I want it single file, side by side? Do I want them singing a song? Do I want them being quiet? Are they getting their, sorting out their dress or their clothes or their uniform if you have one? Am I getting their books out? What are they doing? Do they wait for me for them to come in, or do I let them in one by one, or do they come in by themselves? Or do I want them to come into the classroom and do a starter? Or do I want them to take a book out? Or do I want them to go to the sandpit and get a toy? What do I want them to do? That's the clarity that people need. And many teachers don't think of that. Many teachers don't ask themselves, what is the required behavior? Which, as I said before, is crucial to achieving the right behavior. If they don't know what it is, how are they going to know what to do? So you begin with that. That's the beginning. But you have to be crystal clear on this and why you need the behavior. Once you are clear on it, once you're clear about why this behavior matters, because the children's learning is being impeded, because their safety is being damaged, because their opportunities are being reduced. These are important things. And I think it's really important that any teacher thinks, this is important. This cannot last. This is chaotic. They are not learning very well here. And it's up to me to fix it. Mm-hmm. And then you say to the class, everyone come in, sit down. Welcome, pens down, books closed, eyes on me, please. This is important. Okay, everyone listening now. All right, some of the behavior's been good and some of the learning's been good. I'm very proud of many of you most of the time. However, some of the behavior is not where it should be. Some of the learning is not where it should be, which isn't good enough. And I need you to learn because you matter to me. You create the sense of care, right? But it's a stern care. It's I have a high standard, but I also care about you. This isn't good enough. You can do better. I believe in you. So let's go back to how we're going to enter the classroom. And then you put it on the board. You can give them a sheet to look at, but it must be taught, not just told, taught. So you talk about it. You ask them, you quiz them, you check they've understood. And then crucially, make them do it. Say, right, let's practice this just now. And it seems laborious. It is laborious, but this is how we learn anything. Practice is at the heart of all learning, whether you're learning a new language or learning how to do a high jump or anything at all, practicing until it becomes embedded in your long-term memory. So make them line up or make them come out and go out and come in again and settle really quickly. And then tell them what went wrong and what went right. In other words, you use pedagogy. This is a coaching model. And it might take 5 minutes to do that, but I promise you your behavior will be much better after that. And then you have to hold the line. You say to them, and this is what will happen if we don't try to do this. And if we don't do this, I will have to take some actions. Now, here are my lines, and here are the consequences. And the teacher should follow the whole school consequence code in some extent. I know that that's a problem for some teachers because some schools don't have very many consequences for misbehavior. I mean, some schools will just say, oh, well, ask them again. I mean, these schools don't deserve to have teachers, in my opinion. But use what you have.
Amazing. I love the very practical approach, especially when you pointed out how a teacher can express that some things are going to change. It's very, very valuable, I think. Very interesting for me. Sorry?
No, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. I didn't mean to speak over you. Yeah. All I was going to say was that it's one thing to have a behavior rule. And lots of schools have got behavior rules, but the staff need to be taught what the rules are, as opposed to just given a piece of paper. And the staff need to be trained or taught how to deliver these rules. This is one of the biggest chasms in teacher training, that we say this is the rule, but I won't tell you how to do it. Yeah. And so teachers think, oh, well, I know my children need to be on time, but I don't know what to say to them. Yeah. That's the big problem. So give them a script, give the teachers a scaffold of how to perform this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I myself during my teacher training haven't received any input on how to actually organize the classroom. It was more about how I teach like my subject and like the topics that I'm supposed to teach. And what
this is normal.
Yeah. What this really reminds me of is my son, he's at daycare, so he's 3.5, and they have a very good organization in their daycare. You know what I mean? They have the kids, they know when to pull the wagon with like the little boxes with their snacks in there and where to put the drinks, and like everything is very well structured. And I feel like we're losing that the older the students get, because we assume that, well, they learned at some point and now they know. So even in high school, I think depending on the school, it's very important to have like a very strict plan on what to do and teach the students on how to do it.
Absolutely. And may I just say that when you go to like a kind of a kindergarten environment or a daycare or an early years environment, they're normally really good at this. And the reason is because they have to be. So, if you have 15 two-year-olds in a room and there's not lots of structure, you essentially, you're doomed. You're like mice. But you have to say, this is how we nap. This is when we go to sleep. This is when we ask to go to the toilet. This is how we talk to each other. It's so basic, because this is when it happens most. And we already see by the kindergarten stage a lot of developmental difference between children in terms of the environments they've been exposed to. And when children get to high school, I mean, half the children in high school don't know how to study. They don't know what to do in the canteen. They don't know what good behavior looks like in the corridors. They'll try and work it out, but they'll do what they want to do until someone says, actually, here's what we want you to do.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit more about consequences, maybe? So you said, let's say I established specific rules, my students, I taught them how to behave, but then again, there's, I don't know, 1 or 2 students who misbehave. What options do I have as a teacher? I know that's a very broad question, but maybe.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, mileage varies from country to country. For instance, I remember last time I was in Sweden. It might have changed since then, but last time I was in Sweden, I was told by teachers that they couldn't set any kind of penalty for misbehavior. Really, it was very much about, we'll get the parents in and have a chat. And the only reason they could keep a child behind, for example, was if they hadn't finished their work. You know, which is to me, to my mind, is a mistake. I think when you have a mild but predictable deterrent, and that's the key thing, it has to be mild and predictable. Then a lot of children will just decide, well, I won't bother then to do this misbehavior because they don't want to incur the penalty. This is the reason why people don't park outside Buckingham Palace, as I keep saying. So you have to have a mild penalty, you know, because they know the car is going to be lifted. And if you know that, it doesn't mean that everyone will park sensibly, because some people will still park very stupidly, but most people won't. The deterrent is enough, you know? Mm-hmm. So the types of deterrents that you have are the types of deterrents which, I mean, these are fairly traditional deterrents, and I've got no problems with recommending them. So, for instance, in many countries, you would have a detention. You know, you would keep a child, they would miss some of their break, they would miss some of their after-school time, and it wouldn't have to be long, 15 minutes, maybe half an hour, and the child would sit there and do nothing, perhaps, because it's meant to be boring. It's meant to be not horribly unpleasant, but it's meant to be unpleasant. It's meant to be something they don't want to do again. And we're not doing it because we hate them. We're not giving these detentions out and laughing with evil joy as we do so. In the same way that if you have a speeding ticket, the traffic police, you know, he's not laughing, going, I got you now. There's no pleasure in it. It's a consequence. And I used to always say to children, well, why did you give me a detention? I say, I didn't give you a detention. You gave yourself a detention because this was the rule and you broke it, and you knew the consequence, so you gave it to yourself. I'm just part of the system. And so we should give these consequences with no passion whatsoever. They should be given completely coolly and neutrally because you're entitled to them, you deserve them at some point. So, I mean, children could, for example, they could write, if they're old enough, they could write an explanation about what they did and what was wrong and why they shouldn't do it. Or they could write out the school rules, or they could do some extra work or something. What they shouldn't do is their homework, because we're not trying to give them an advantage. We're not trying to say, oh, welcome to detention. It's really nice here. You can just sit here and do your homework, because they should be doing that anyway. So it should be something which makes them kind of go, oh, God. To be honest, with most children, simply being taken away from their friends for 15 minutes is normally enough of a penalty. But they'd rather be playing with their friends and they're not, and they're just sat with you. So something mild. It shouldn't be anything complicated. And I see some teachers trying to come up with weird and wacky sanctions. Please don't. I mean, tidying a classroom is fine. 10 minutes of that. Tidying the playground, 10 minutes of that is fine. Some people would say, oh, with horror, this is a terrible thing. It's a great thing to do because they don't want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Thank you for the concrete ideas. Maybe let's do a little shift. Tom, you founded ResearchED, a very inspiring community organization. I just found out about it 2 or 3 months ago. Definitely planning to go if I find the time. What is the story behind the movement? What is the future vision for research-informed teaching? Can you shed some light on that?
Absolutely. I mean, years ago, like 2008, 2009, I was oh no, tell a lie. I beg your pardon. I was a teacher from 2003. And I noticed very quickly that there didn't seem to be a lot of scientific evidence or research involved in education. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's loads of research going on, but good stuff wasn't getting into the classroom, and most of it was rubbish. Mm-hmm. And that it was odd that people could say almost anything in education. People could say, oh, let's give children homework. How many times a week? Oh, 4 times a week. Why not? And nobody knew if that was good or bad. It was just something we did. And we did it because that was the way we always did it. And we existed in what I call, I mean, you've heard of folk medicine. Well, I call this folk teaching, because we just did it because everyone else does it. And you could say anything and somebody would agree or disagree. And I realized that, I mean, my background was philosophy and epistemology and theory of knowledge and how we know what we know. And I remember thinking, this is very unscientific. People just make stuff up. And so I started ResearchED as a kind of conference-based community to try to encourage people to look at and analyze the research that we have. And this is the thing that I know you're very aware of. There's a huge amount of research there about learning, motivation, focus, memory, cognition, development, emotions and so on. There's a huge field of this, but teachers weren't being trained in any of it. And I just find this, I still find this quite absurd that in my teacher training, I mean, for instance, in my teacher training, I was taught how to make posters with the children. In my teacher training, I wasn't taught how to do a starter or a plenary. I wasn't taught how to revise. I wasn't taught how to give an instruction. I wasn't taught about how to make sure I said something memorably or anything at all to do with that. It was just junk. It was gaseous, and we learned about things like learning styles and brain gym and stuff like this. I remember memorably one of my professional training sessions. We had to draw. There was an outline of a silhouette of a man, like a gingerbread man, and we had to design our ideal teacher. I just thought, this is so childish. What are we doing? We might as well just colour it in. And I'm thinking, we're professionals. So I started ResearchED, and really it's like a low-cost, zero-profit organisation. And I've been running it for, 11 years now, since 2013. And we have conferences all over the world now. And we basically get researchers, academics, teachers, leaders, anybody involved in education who's got something evidence-informed or interesting to say about evidence. And so we can have teachers, we can have teaching assistants, we can have bursars and all kinds of people talking about memory and learning and so on. The focus is normally cognitive psychology because that's where some of the best evidence bases are. But we also talk about anything evidence informed to do with, I don't know, which schools last the longest in terms of the building materials and so on. Anything really to do with evidence. And it's really just to try to move the needle and make education a more evidence-informed sector, and to try to take us out of the kind of dark ages. People often talk about, we want our children to be 21st century learners. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's getting a bit late in the century for that now, if I'm honest, but we should be looking at 22nd century. But then they'll talk about education with the lens of 19th century philosophy. And I just think it's so bizarre. So when we get lots of people who are deeply involved in kind of more progressive forms of education, and they believe that children learn best by themselves, and they believe that, for instance, children learn best in groups, so they believe that children learn best by discovery learning or project learning and so on. And all the evidence suggests that this is wrong. All of that is wrong. That children learn best with direct instruction, teacher-led instruction, lots of practice, lots of repetition, lots of individual work, and then some group work too. But it's not this kind of slightly progressive Silicon Valley dream of education with lots of technology and lots of flipped learning and so on. This is nonsense, and there's no evidence behind most of that at all. And there's lots of evidence behind the things I've just described, like direct instruction, teacher-led instruction, retrieval practice, spaced learning, cognitive load theory, and so on. We know a lot about how children learn, and it is shocking how poorly we train our teachers in that area, which is ironic. So that's something I've tried to change. So we've got conferences all over the world now, and it's been a joy to be a catalyst, to be a part of that, and it's inspired me, and it keeps me going.
Yeah, amazing, so valuable, and it's very interesting also to me because this is also what I learned, like group work, or do group work, do projects, like these big projects where students develop or explore topics themselves, etc., within a group. And I just wonder, where does it come from them? I mean, if it's not from not from science or not backed with, I don't know, where does it come from, this idea?
Well, it comes from the 19th century. It comes from, it's inspired by the philosophy of people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, mm-hmm. and some aspects of John Locke and so on. There's lots of people. This idea that, Jean-Jacques Rousseau is one of the forefathers of this movement. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau fathered half a dozen children and abandoned every single one of them to orphanages and the poorhouse. Mm-hmm. He's a terrible example. He wrote his one of his masterpieces in education was called Emile, and it was a completely fictional account of how a child should learn. And it was based around this very odd idea that children are naturally good and they want to learn, and we should just get out of the way and let them do it all by themselves. And it's society and the family and civilization and the city that corrupts children and makes them stupid and makes them misbehave and so on. And it became incredibly popular. And we see this in things like, to a lesser extent, but things like the Montessori movement and so on, the works of people like John Dewey and lots of other progressive educators of the early 20th century. It became very fashionable. And the thing is, it was called progressive because it was believed to be, the new science of learning. And it was anything but. It was entirely a philosophical movement. And because of this, we saw a lot of, particularly independent schools, but increasingly state environments, succumbing to this idea that children learn best by themselves and we should just step out of the way and let them guide their own curriculum and so on. Anybody who's ever met a child knows how stupid this is. That, if you say to a child, guide your own curriculum, 1 in 1,000 will pick some fantastic texts and, and teach themselves. You have to be a real autodidact, a Tony Stark figure or something, like a natural genius. Most children will just learn what pleases them, which is to say not very much. Most children won't try very hard. I mean, some children will, but most won't. And if we follow this progressive form of education, we abandon some of the least privileged children to constant generational poverty. So we need to step into that and short circuit that and make a difference. And the reason why it's persisted is because it's very seductive, it's very attractive. People call it things like, I want to teach the whole child, and that children are just naturally curious, they're just naturally good learners, and it sounds lovely. But as I say, it dooms children to the cages of their own imaginations. And of course, our job is to lead the child out into the world. Our job is to scaffold the world for the child. Our job is to bring the world to the child, not let the child reach the world entirely by themselves, because many of them won't make the journey very well.
Very interesting.
Apart from that, I love it,
Yeah. I just read a book by Barbara Oakley. Brilliant. Now I forgot the title. I will link the book down below. You can find out about it. You can edit this out. You can make yourself sound like you remembered. It's fine. Yeah.
But she's brilliant.
Yeah, very well.
She's spoken for us at several ResearchED conferences, and she is such a wonderful translator.
Yeah.
Because she speaks academic research very, very well, but she also kind of speaks the language of the classroom. She speaks the language of what it's like to actually be with children. And people like that are quite rare. People who can speak both languages.
Yeah. 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 I realized while reading, she's a good teacher, because I understood all the complex and difficult science behind learning and stuff. And and this, just what you just said reminded me of what she said in her book. There's a difference between the evolutionary, natural kind of learning and the non-evolutionary kind of learning, the things we do at school. So learning how to talk your mother tongue or how to walk, stuff like that comes natural to children, whereas learning how to read, how to write, doing math, etc., is more complex. So it's not, because sometimes I hear people who argue that, as you just said, so children have this natural instinct to learn. They learn so many things in their life already, so they want to learn more. But I think we have to understand maybe that there's a difference in the way or the style of learning and the effort maybe that is required to learn.
This is called biologically primary and biologically secondary learning, right. And there's lots of things that we're naturally really good at learning. This is from the work of people like Gary, and this, of course, informs cognitive load theory and the work of people like Professor John Sweller. I'll give you a really good example. So, my son loves my iPad, loves it. I mean, what a surprise! He's 9 years old, loves an iPad, and you give him the iPad, and I remember he was so keen. I was really curious about it. And I was watching him, I didn't just give it to him unsupervised. And within about half an hour, he'd worked out how to use the home screen. He'd worked out swiping, activate, he'd worked out which were games and so on. So yeah, there was a natural curiosity there. He was attracted to finding out, and he worked out really well. And of course, Apple products, I'm not trying to sell them here, but they are quite intuitive. They're quite intuitive face. But his curiosity stopped when it was sated. His curiosity stopped once he'd found out how to get into games and play them. He was not, after that point, determined to learn about how iPads work. He was not determined to work out about, how electricity works and how physics works and what an electron is and how screens work and so on and how the internet works and what electromagnetism is. He stopped at that point because that was enough. That was fun. I got what I wanted. And our job is to take them beyond that. Our job is to take them into things like, right, this is what electricity is. This is how it works. This is how magnetism works. And this is how we get signals across the world and what a satellite does and blah, 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 blah. That's our job. They won't do it by themselves. we have to do that for them. So the progressive model of learning and the progressive model of teaching is completely at odds with the reality of how people learn and teach.
Eye-opening, really. Maybe in relation to that, I recently read an interview with Nick Gibb, in which he talked about the educational reform in England that took place, which turned out or resulted in better PISA results, for instance. Is that in some way related to the sharing of research, like background and better teacher training, or what happened? Can you shed some light on that, maybe?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was really interesting to be part of this kind of quiet revolution in England. It wasn't so much the UK; it was England, where I was teaching at the time. We were really lucky, I have to say, because there was people like me who were starting organisations like ResearchED, and this was very much a ground up movement. This was talking directly to educators and persuading them on the ground that these are better ways to learn than you've been taught in your terrible teacher training. And we've been doing this for years now, and we've had, multiple tens of thousands of people coming to our events. They then go back to the schools. So that's a kind of a slow, kind of ground-based revolution. But we were very fortunate at the same time that we had some people in policy, in the political level, in the Ministry of Education or the Department of Education, as we would call it, who were also on the same page, who'd realised that there was a revolution just around the corner if we wanted it. And so we had lots of policy changes from the top down as well as the bottom up. And we kind of supported and helped one another. So there was lots and lots of curriculum review and change in the UK. And we also had a government which was in power for a long time. And we had a school minister, Nick Gibb, who was in post for, I think, a better part of a decade. So there was continuity of policy. And normally you get policy churn in politics because the next education secretary or minister comes along and changes everything. But no, there was continuity. So we had curriculum reform, we had reform of teacher training, we had reform of leadership training, we had reform of behaviour training, we had reform of policies affecting all these things. We introduced a phonics check. We introduced compulsory phonics teaching. It became mandatory rather than some of the rubbish techniques which are used throughout the world. And this all kind of came together. And I wrote the behaviour review, and I rewrote the guidance for schools and upheld their rights to use discipline, but also good behaviour methods and so on. And so I think overall we had this very long, continuous change. And it was a very slow ship to move. And we were very, very fortunate to have that opportunity. I mean, the government got so many things wrong, right? We did not have what you might call a stable period of government. However, this was one thing that they got right, and it was education. And to be honest, I think what's really interesting is that very few people in that party, in that political party, very few people realised what they did. It was only a very few people in the Department of Education who understood what they were doing and the successes they'd caused. So we've now started to see some really, really positive results now, relatively speaking, in PISA, which isn't it's not the only way we measure these things, but it's not bad. And for the first time in a long time, England has been showing really, really, really positive outcomes, and it's because of all this continuous, sustained success. So Nick Gibb was a big part of that. He was very supportive of us, and very supportive of me and ResearchED, and he also gave me the post of behaviour advisor, so that really helped as well.
I think this is the point where we as German educators or politicians or whoever in Germany should really listen up, because it's such a necessary step, I feel, that has to be done in Germany as well. Can you tell us a bit more specific, in what way did you change the curriculum? And also, what was your advice for behavior management and stuff? Like a bit more, maybe concrete, some examples.
Absolutely. Well, curriculum and pedagogy go very closely together, because before the reforms, the curriculum in the UK was what you might call more emphasised on skills. So we were trying to teach children to be creative. We're trying to teach them to be critical thinkers and so on. And I mean, that's a good thing, obviously, but the problem is you can't teach these things directly. That for instance, you can only be a critical thinker about something if you know a lot about it. You know, I mean, if you showed me a car engine and said, has this been designed well? I couldn't tell you unless I know a lot about a car engine. Yeah. And people who are very good at critically thinking about chess know a lot about chess, but they can't be good critical thinkers at politics unless you know a lot about politics. It's not a skill by itself. It's very heavily domain-specific knowledge. And so there was a big push for the curriculum to be two things. One, far more emphasizing knowledge, which sounds like it should all be an obvious thing to say, but a lot of people say, no, knowledge, no, we should be teaching skills, which is a great way to keep children stupid. And then once you've got lots of knowledge, then you can use that to develop, more critical thinking skills and so on. So we changed the curriculum to do that. And also the curriculum became a lot more sequenced so that one thing followed another. So that, what you did in 1 year affected what you did in the next year and the next year and the next year. And that there was continuity of progress, particularly in things like mathematics, for example. There was a greater emphasis in literacy so that children could achieve access to key texts and so on. And there was a greater emphasis in direct instruction, the teacher-led model of education and so on. So that's how curriculum was reformed, and pedagogy kind of came with it too, which meant that we had to reform teacher training. And teacher training institutions would be delisted if they didn't conform to some of these things. A lot of this had to be quite top-down because a lot of the teacher training institutions didn't want to change because they themselves were deeply progressive and they were deeply wedded to this idea that children were naturally good learners and we just had to get out of the way and so on, which is obviously rubbish. So that's the kind of things that we did to try to change things. And then around about 2017, we changed the behaviour advice to try to promote this idea of a behaviour curriculum so that children had to be explicitly taught what it is that they have to do to succeed in schools. And we've started to see some green shoots from that as well. So I think all of these things have combined.
Yeah, wow. So much to learn from. I'm really, really happy that you shed some light on that, really. Tom, our time is actually, unfortunately, already up. I feel like we only scratched the surface. There's so much more we could talk about, really. It was truly inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your evidence-based teaching, what really works in the classroom. I really appreciate your practical approach and everything that you do to help teachers in teacher training all around the world. You're reaching the right people, I think. And yes, thank you so much. I will link everything below. So if you want to, if the listeners want to find out more about ResearchED, about your work, and where they can, become part of the movement, so to speak, you will find all the links below.
Yeah, please.
Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.